Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a fantastic New Year's Eve, staying safe, enjoying the celebrations, and looking ahead to the new year with a bit of optimism. Today's story is a big one, and it's moving fast. So if you're an American taxpayer, a worker, a retiree, or someone simply trying to make sense of what's coming next for the economy, you'll want to stick with me all the way through because what we're talking about today could directly impact your wallet in a very real way. President Donald Trump has once again sent shockwaves through the political and economic landscape by floating the idea of sending out $2,000 stimulus-style rebate checks to millions of Americans. According to his latest comments, these checks would go to individuals earning under $100,000 per year, with higher thresholds potentially applying to married couples. What makes this proposal especially interesting is not just the amount, but where the money would come from, and when Trump says it could happen. This is not framed as traditional stimulus funded by borrowing or deficit spending, but rather as a so-called dividend paid out of tariff revenue that the administration says is already pouring in. At the same time, this proposal is colliding head-on with a massive legal showdown that's about to unfold at the Supreme Court. As soon as January, the nation's highest court is expected to rule on whether President Trump's sweeping tariffs were constitutional in the first place. These tariffs, many of which were imposed under emergency powers without prior approval from Congress, have become the backbone of Trump's trade policy and, crucially, the very source of revenue he now wants to use to fund these $2,000 checks. This sets up a dramatic moment where economics, law, and politics all intersect. On one hand, the administration is promising direct cash payments to Americans who are struggling with higher prices, stubborn inflation, and economic uncertainty. On the other hand, the legal foundation for the tariffs generating that money could be knocked out from under them almost overnight. And yet, even if that happens, the White House is signaling loudly that it already has a plan B. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed in recent interviews that January will be a pivotal month, not just because of the Supreme Court's tariff ruling, but also because of decisions related to the future leadership of the Federal Reserve. According to Bessent, the administration has multiple revenue options on the table, but it would strongly prefer that the court rule in favor of President Trump's trade policies. He described the legal fight over tariffs as one of enormous consequence, even framing it as a life-or-death issue for the country's economic direction. At the heart of the Supreme Court cases are challenges brought by American businesses that say Trump overstepped his constitutional authority. One case was brought by an educational toy manufacturer, while another came from a family-owned wine and spirits importer. These companies argue that the president relied too heavily on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs that should have required congressional approval. The question the justices must answer is whether that law truly gives the president such broad authority or whether these tariffs crossed a constitutional line. For businesses on the ground, the impact of these tariffs has been immediate and often painful. Companies importing goods from countries like China, South Korea, and others have been forced to pay higher import taxes at the border. In many cases, that means higher costs for the same products they've been selling for years. Businesses then face an impossible choice. They can absorb the higher costs and accept lower profits, or they can raise prices and risk losing customers who are already stretched thin. For consumers, this dynamic plays out every time they shop. A product that used to cost $18 might now cost $20, and that difference matters when households are juggling rent, groceries, fuel, and healthcare. For some families, even small price increases are enough to push items out of the budget entirely. Others might start shopping around looking for cheaper alternatives or cutting back on non-essential purchases altogether. This ripple effect is one of the main reasons tariffs are so controversial. President Trump, however, has consistently pushed back on the idea that tariffs necessarily hurt consumers. He argues that foreign countries, particularly China, end up lowering their prices to remain competitive in the U.S. market. According to this view, even with the added import taxes, the overall cost to American businesses stays roughly the same because the initial price of the goods falls. In theory, that would allow companies to avoid raising prices and protect consumers from feeling the impact. The reality, as many Americans have noticed, is more complicated. Inflation has recently ticked back up to around 3%, And while tariffs aren't the only factor driving that increase, they are certainly part of the broader picture. Tariffs are, at their core, taxes on imported goods. Although companies technically pay them, the cost often gets passed along the supply chain until it lands on consumers. That's why economists frequently warn that tariffs can function like a hidden tax on everyday Americans. Despite these concerns, the tariff revenue itself has been enormous. Since the administration announced its so-called Liberation Day tariffs in April, total duty revenue reached approximately $215.2 billion in fiscal year 2025, which ended on September 30th. That figure comes directly from the Treasury Department's Customs and Certain Excise Taxes report. It's this massive pool of money that Trump now wants to tap into to fund rebate checks. But here's where things get even more complicated. If the Supreme Court rules that Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional, the federal government could be forced to refund billions of dollars to companies that paid those duties. That would not only create chaos in financial markets, but also blow a massive hole in the revenue stream Trump is counting on. Markets are already bracing for this possibility, with traders warning that a ruling against the tariffs could trigger turbulence and force the White House to act quickly. According to reports from outlets like the Financial Times and the New York Post, the Trump administration is already preparing for that scenario. Behind the scenes, officials are reportedly dusting off decades-old trade statutes and obscure legal provisions to keep the tariff regime alive even if the current approach is struck down. One of the most prominent tools under consideration is Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, which allows the president to impose tariffs on national security grounds. Section 232 has been used before to target imports of steel, aluminum, automobiles, copper, and even lumber. By framing tariffs as essential to national security, the administration could bypass some of the legal vulnerabilities now facing its emergency-based approach. This strategy would allow Trump to reissue tariffs quickly, minimizing any interruption in revenue and maintaining pressure on foreign trading partners. Prediction markets and legal analysts increasingly believe the Supreme Court may strike down at least part of the current tariff framework. If that happens, the administration is expected to move almost immediately, rolling out a new set of tariffs under alternative legal authorities. The message from the White House is clear. Regardless of what the court decides, these tariffs are not going away without a fight. And that brings us back to the $2,000 checks. According to President Trump, a portion of the tariff revenue should be returned directly to the American people in the form of what he's calling a rebate or dividend. The idea is that if tariffs are bringing in hundreds of billions of dollars, Americans should see some of that money in their own bank accounts. Under the proposal as it currently stands, individuals earning under $100,000 per year would be eligible, with married couples potentially qualifying up to a combined income of $200,000. That would cover a substantial portion of the population, including many middle-class households that have not qualified for other forms of recent assistance. However, even if Trump is fully committed to this idea, there's still a major obstacle standing in the way: Congress. According to CBS News, Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council, said that any plan to distribute $2,000 checks funded by tariff revenue would ultimately depend on congressional approval. He indicated that the president is expected to bring a formal proposal to Congress in the new year. This isn't the first time Trump has floated the idea of tariff-funded rebates. Since July, he's repeatedly suggested that Americans could receive direct payments tied to trade revenue. In November, he went even further, posting on social media that a dividend of at least $2,000 per person would be paid to everyone. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent later clarified that the checks would likely be targeted toward households earning less than $100,000 and emphasized that the plan was still under discussion. Timing is another key factor. Back in November, Trump suggested that the checks could be sent out sometime in the middle of next year. That places a potential rollout in June, July, August, or even September. Politically, that timing would be significant, landing just ahead of the midterm elections. Supporters argue that returning tariff revenue to the public is fair and logical, while critics see it as a strategic move designed to boost voter support. Whether these checks actually materialize remains an open question. There are legal hurdles, political battles, and economic risks all tangled together in this proposal. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs and the administration struggles to replace them quickly, the revenue needed for the checks could evaporate. Even if the tariffs remain in place, convincing Congress to approve the distribution of funds could prove difficult in a deeply divided political environment. For now, Americans are left watching and waiting. The idea of a $2,000 check is undeniably appealing, especially at a time when many families are still feeling the pressure of higher prices and economic uncertainty. But as with so many things in Washington, the gap between bold promises and actual policy can be wide. As January approaches, all eyes will be on the Supreme Court and the White House. The rulings and decisions made in the coming weeks could shape trade policy, government revenue, and household finances for years to come. Whether this ends with checks in the mail or just another heated political debate remains to be seen. I'd really like to hear what you think about all of this. Do you believe these $2,000 checks will actually go out? Or do you think this is more about political messaging than real economic relief? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this is a conversation worth having. That's all for today's video. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.